All right, let's talk about something that trips up even the best-intentioned managers. We're diving into the hidden legal risks that can pop up in everyday work life. We're not talking about huge, obvious mistakes here, but those small, casual oversights that can quietly snowball into massive, massive problems. Okay, let's get into it.
To really get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number, 522,000. That's how many employee inquiries and complaints were filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in just 1 year. You have to figure almost every single one of those started with a simple interaction, a small decision, a misstep at the manager level.
And that's the real kicker, isn't it? It's like this quote says, a casual oversight can just snowball. What might seem like an off-the-cuff comment or, a rush decision can escalate so fast into a formal complaint, an investigation, or a really, really expensive lawsuit. And when I say expensive, I mean it. The average damages for just one of these discrimination lawsuits can be $500,000. Think about that. That's a number that can absolutely cripple a small business and put a serious dent in a larger one. The stakes are just incredibly high. So, where are these risks actually hiding? Well, our first danger zone is something managers do all day, every day. They communicate. We're talking about what's written down and what's said out loud. Let's look at how your words, even when you mean well, can seriously backfire. Now check this out, because this is where good intentions can go completely sideways. A manager writes a friendly, encouraging note in a performance review. Seems like a nice thing to do, right? Wrong. Fast forward a few months, that employee's performance tanks and they're let go. Well, now that vague positive comment becomes Exhibit A for their lawyer, directly contradicting the company's reason for termination. So how do you avoid that trap? It really comes down to 3 simple but absolutely crucial rules. First, be objective. Stick to the facts. Write down what you see and hear, not what you feel or think. Second, get specific. Dates, outcomes, key details, those are your best friends. And third, lock it down. This stuff is confidential, and it needs to be stored securely, period. But look, the danger isn't just what you write down. It's also in the biases that can creep into your decisions and the words you say out loud. A manager might think they're being thoughtful or considerate, but a simple assumption can easily cross the line into discrimination.
And this is a perfect real-world example of that. A manager just assumes that mothers with young kids won't want a demanding project, so they don't even offer them the opportunity. Well, by making a decision based on that stereotype about gender and family, that manager has just opened the company up to a serious discrimination claim. Okay, let's move on, because this all builds. The next major pitfall isn't about what you do, it's about what you don't do. Honestly, one of the fastest ways to make a bad situation worse is to just ignore an employee's complaint or request. Now, this is a stat that blows a lot of people's minds. The #1 charge filed with EEOC isn't for the original discrimination, it's for retaliation. Over half of all charges include it. That means even if the first complaint was totally baseless, the company can still lose, and lose big, just because of how a manager reacted to it.
So you gotta ask, what does retaliation even look like in the real world? It's almost never as obvious as someone shouting, "You're fired." It's usually way, way more subtle than that. A lot of the time, it's hiding in plain sight. An employee raises a valid concern, and then suddenly, they're not invited to the big weekly meeting anymore. Or their work, which was perfectly fine last week, is now getting picked apart for tiny errors. These little shifts aren't just bad management. They're illegal if they're punishment for speaking up. And this whole idea of not ignoring people, it's actually baked into the law, specifically with the Americans with Disabilities Act. If an employee asks for an accommodation, a manager can't just give a simple yes or no. The law demands an interactive process, which is really just a fancy way of saying you have to have a good faith conversation to figure out a solution. Just shutting that conversation down is a huge legal no-no. All right, our final danger zone covers the real nuts and bolts of any job, how people get paid, when they work, and if they're safe doing it. These areas are just hotspots for compliance violations that can be really easy for managers to miss. So one of the most common and expensive mistakes starts right here, not understanding the difference between exempt and non-exempt employees. If you get this wrong, you could be on the hook for years of back pay for unpaid overtime. It's pretty simple. Non-exempt staff must get paid for any hours over 40 in a week. Exempt staff don't. The whole key is knowing who falls into which bucket. And that leads to a classic misstep that happens all the time. A manager lets a non-exempt employee, just quickly answer a few emails after hours or finish up a report from home, unpaid. Here's the thing.
Even if the employee offers to do it for free, the law doesn't care. It's work, and it has to be paid for. And remember those few off-the-clock emails we just talked about? Well, they add up. Big time. Every year, the Department of Labor hands out about $2.5 million in penalties just for getting that classification wrong. And that's before the company has to pay back all the wages they owe.
And finally, we have safety. This is where managers are literally the first line of defense. Every time a new piece of equipment isn't properly explained, or a reported hazard gets ignored, or the rules on safety gear get a little lax, you're opening the door to injuries, OSHA fines, and really serious legal trouble. So, with all of these hidden landmines out there, how does a company actually stay safe? The solution isn't just about dodging individual mistakes here and there. It's about building a real systemic defense, a true culture of compliance. It really just boils down to that classic old saying. Taking the time to proactively train your managers, encouraging people to speak up, and making this stuff a core value, it is so much cheaper and way more effective than trying to deal with lawsuits and penalties after it's too late. And that really leaves us with one final crucial question to think about for your own workplace. Is your culture a safety net that catches these issues when they're small? Or is it more of a minefield where everyone's just unknowingly stepping toward the next hidden risk? The answer to that question makes all the difference.